This week's Parsha is Parshas Vaera, and in this week's Parsha, we continue with the story that began last week, which is sending Moshe Rabbeinu on his task of alerting Pharaoh that the Jews are leaving Egypt. They're putting him on notice. So the idea was that basically, I'm going to say that we're going to leave, you're going to let us go. What's strange about the current situation in which Moshe Rabbeinu finds himself is that the initial petition was rejected. We have no reason to reject them. And it's a weird circumstance because the Egyptians are both totally disgusted with the Jewish people at this point. They've made that clear from the beginning of the Sefer Shmos. And at this point, Moshe Rabbeinu is complaining to God. They're not letting the people go. God says, well, just wait to see what I have in store. So what's interesting is that what makes this story rather unique is that it's not like the Egyptians are harmless in this situation. They just won't let the people go. They've already killed a large number of Jews. They have forcibly put them into labor. And just let's say that sensitivities are such that these things are not right, going back thousands of years, right? Even to the 13th century BCE, when a lot of these things all take place. They don't like that, whether it's the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, right? Go back far enough, any age. Sometimes slavery was acceptable, sometimes it was not, but the forced labor and the killing and all these things, the Egyptians should have been held accountable. But God is trying to demonstrate to Moshe, which is to then demonstrate to Pharaoh, that you have a lesson to learn. So everybody's got something to learn. So what lesson is everybody trying to learn in this week's Parsha? Because what does God say? Vaera el Avraham, right? I appeared. So it's not that I spoke to them, but it's that I appeared to them. I made myself known to them. And the thing that's strange about that is that obviously God is not a corporeal thing, and the way he makes himself known and obvious and visual to them is by giving them different experiences of him. And the experience of Hashem being the eternal one is not one which they had yet experienced. The Ramban kind of talks about this from the end of in the middle of last week's Parsha, where he says that the promise left over at the end of Sefer Bereshis was "Bakot bakati eschem." I will certainly remember you, okay, which is a theme in and of itself. That Yosef asks the Sar HaMashkim, he asks the head of the wine for Pharaoh to remember him and recall him to Pharaoh, right? But that's not how it plays out. And we see the same idea again, that God will remember the Jewish people, and God's saying to Moshe Rabbeinu here, I'm remembering you. So there is a very important lesson to be learned. But there's something else that needs to happen. That's the idea of the fact that there is a process of learning that is being played out in the Parsha. It's not so much that God needs to walk through and pull the Jewish people out. This is within God's power. But as the Abravanel points out, he says, I find the two answers that my predecessors, the Rambam, Maimonides, and Nachmanides, the Ramban, offered to explain God's intervention in Pharaoh's life is being insufficient. Meaning, I think we should all agree that Pharaoh did something wrong, but also that Hashem wants to offer these people the opportunity to do tshuva. So the question is, where is this balance between needing to learn the lesson, needing to make a commitment to do better, and then doing the better? What are the lines between that? The only other opportunity we see for something like this playing out up until now in the story is we have people getting punished in the Garden of Eden. We have people getting punished in the times of the flood. And then we also mentioned that the people who live currently in the land of Canaan, in the land of Canaan, are going to be removed from the land. But we don't see firsthand everything that they do. We kind of have some flavors of it. We aren't really introduced to everything they do wrong. By the Egyptians and by Pharaoh, we see firsthand everything they're doing wrong up until now. And the Midrash in Shemosh Rabbah in the 10th chapter, and also the Gemara in Saita in Daf Yud Aleph, on base, in Sota, on the folio pages, you have 11a and 11b. In those situations, they point out that a lot has been going on at this time period, and so there are things going on for which they should be held accountable. So it's not that they're being excused for it, but what's missing out in the story is exactly how the action, the reaction, and the punishment are meted out, and they're meted out in a very particularly unique way. And what makes Paro's story particularly unique is the fact that he is being given the opportunity to make up for the actions of both himself and the nation around him. And in modern sensibility, we've seen the struggle with this idea about who is responsible. Is there a difference between government's actions and the people's actions? How does it all play out? The king has one level of responsibility, and the people taking the direct order have another level of responsibility. But then the people under them, who are regular citizens, they're not necessarily doing it because they want to, but it's under duress. But these interactions are not being played out. Now, Ramban points this thing out, which is that the whole thing is focused on the leadership itself, and that's the focal point. And it talks about how that Hashem has the ability to kind of tilt the direction of the leader in one way or another. But that doesn't explain to us exactly how we learn the lesson over here. Is it the idea that we do something wrong, just do tshuva? Well, we see play out 100 times all throughout history that just simply paying lip service to tshuva is inefficient. Now, not to get too much off track over here, but the discussion in the Gemara in Yuma and Daf Ayin Hey, page 75, is the question is, how does Yom Kippur, for example, wipe away the sins, right? Right? They will be wiped away. Yechaper, right? It's talking about brushing away. It's a very interesting words. Okay, it's an interesting word, that something that gets moved to the side, almost like a window dressing, and you take the window dressing and you slide it out of the way. It's moved out of the way, or if we talk about in Yeshayahu, it goes from something that's stained to something that's white and clean. Or in Zechariah, he makes the same analogy of something that has been soiled and is now clean. So, is there a cleansing process going on in Egypt, or is this simply a process of prosecuting what's gone wrong? And I think it's a little bit of both, which is something that the Abravanel is not touching on, essentially, and that the other Rishonim are not really touching on. The idea is that the progress that's being made in Egypt is meant to demonstrate to them the failures of their own society and the weaknesses in their own belief system, so that they're not being charged and then punished, but are basically playing out, or allowed to play out on the scene exactly with the feelings that they're supposed to realize, both we've done wrong and we can do better. So that's something that the Avos don't really see play out during their lifetimes. They only see Hashem capable of great things, and they are given tremendous amounts of protection, and that's what they experience is the sense of safety and security and protection. They don't get to see the level of effort that gets put into trying to move an entire nation, the heart of one nation, in a particular direction. And since that's something that they aren't experiencing, it's something that is a unique storyline here in our Parsha. It's a novel approach to how nations change and evolve. And so we find that both the Jewish nation has to do some of that, and also the Egyptian nation has to do some of that. So there's a if we focus particularly on the Egyptians and on Paro, what we're seeing is that Hashem is attempting to move the needle in the right direction when it comes to Paroi. And so we find those ideas echoed in the Midrashim and in the Gemara, that Paro is not being given the opportunity to do wrong. He is being given the strength to learn to do right or to learn to do wrong. And that's really the idea, is that the tools are being made available. How you use them is something else. And that's really the main point in the thrust of the story. That's something that the Avos haven't seen. The fact that we have access to such a powerful being doesn't necessarily equate to us being able to use that to our benefit. It's a tool that's at our disposal. We can ask for it, and we can possibly be rewarded with it. And this is actually a theme that's more developed later on in the Nevi'im, when we actually have already established the Jewish kingdoms, and how that plays out, how our own behaviors and how our own actions both implicate and reward us in terms of the establishment and the expansion of our own independence in the world. Here we're getting a taste of the opposite side of that, which is that we are deserving of this geula. We've been promised this geula. We have earned this redemption. It's been foretold. So we see a lot of the aspects of having this relationship with Hashem that have been revealed to the Avos. That there is a concept of ideas being revealed to you, plans being revealed, knowing a sense of the future, but not knowing whether or not you've earned it or deserved it. And those are two very different things. And that's what's playing out with Paro as well. You may be deserving of punishment. You've done things wrong. We saw it in last week's Parsha. The question is, how do we deal with these behaviors? And so either we're going to allow you to continue to perpetuate the wrongs and then hold you ultimately responsible, which is what God says, that inevitably he will be punished by having his own firstborn, because that would be an equitable judgment against him. Or is it the fact that you will do better? Will you do better? And I always really like to quote this small medrash that's an Avos Rabbi Nassan that presents the idea that Paro, at the end of this whole story, after they cross the Red Sea and everybody gets drowned, so there's a question: does Paro survive or not? So that medrash posits that he does survive, and he actually makes his way to Nineveh and becomes the Melech of Ashur. Why? Because we see in the story of Yonah that Melech Ashur, that the king of Nineveh, the king of the Assyrians, does tshuva when God asks him to do tshuva. It's a huge movement forward. What tshuva were they doing for? I don't know. They were still engaged in idolatry. We see from the book of Kings that when Tiglath-Pileser comes to the northern kingdom, they're still idolatrous. What did they do tshuva for in that story? So the idea is that it's not something they did tshuva, it's just that they understood how important the national movement towards tshuva was to the overall development of the nation. And looking at our story in that light, we can understand better why it is that Hashem hardens the heart and increases his resolve. If you don't have the resolve to do something, you're not going to be able to move both yourself and motivate others to do that thing. So either you make a good decision and motivate everyone towards tshuva, or you make the wrong decision and motivate everyone towards a path of destruction. Even if you win, there could be a path of destruction and rebuilding that's left in your path. But those are the choices. And so therefore, the resolve being given to him was both the resolve to do right and be better for the nation of Egypt, or to have the resolve to do everything that was inevitably going to be wrong. And so that's the sense of being an eternal being, is the idea that you watch the whole scenario play out, and it takes a long period of time. So we see that the Pharaoh in the story of Yosef himself has to learn to basically subvert himself to the will of God. That's an important lesson. And we find in Egyptian history you have people like Akhenaten that try to develop a sense of worshiping one God, but he wants to worship the sun. You win some, you lose some with these things. But by Paro, who says, "Lo yada es Yosef," he didn't understand. He didn't know Yosef. He didn't understand the progress that was being made, and he sent the country backwards. And in many ways, he was the people associate him with Ramses II. Ramses II always has the image of the outstretched arm, that he somehow is the one who makes the decisions. And unlike Yerva ben Nevat, there's no immediate punishment to show him the error of his ways. He has to go back to the ways that they were working towards. Go back towards making the progress of recognizing that the world doesn't bow to the whim of the Pharaoh. And that's an important lesson for him to learn. And it's one that Pharaoh struggles with, and we see play out in the Parsha. We'll develop this idea more going forward. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe and to share. And we'll see you, Bez Hashem, next Erev Shabbos.